Good morning. So, I'm a little obsessed with track. It eats up a ton of my time and thoughts. And I'd say I like running as much as a person can like running. But I also really enjoy coding and making games. It's something I always want to do but often don't have the time. Man, wouldn't it be nice if I could somehow combine the two things that I love and am dedicated to? Like making a game about track. So that's where I am now, making a game about track. But how do you make an interesting game about track? None of the gameplay of track is actually that thrilling. Many would even describe it as boring. So how will I make this fun? Well, if any of you were alive for the thriving days of Flash games, then you might remember the hit game QWOP. Its frustrating movement gave players the drive to push through and try and accomplish something. But I also felt like the controls, the main feature, also pushes away a bunch of players by how challenging it is. So what if I use this game as inspiration for my own physics-based running game with a different set of controls and my own twist on things? Man, this channel is just me making a scuffed remake of popular games. I would try and make the movement fairly easy to understand and try to make it quite versatile. So with an idea in mind, I opened my laptop and started prototyping an idea for my game. I started with trying to make a body rigged up with joints and springs to just see how it would feel in Unity. I got a bunch of colliders drawn up and went to the Unity asset store to go find some temporary assets. But wait, I was actually on a bus going to a track meet at that moment and I didn't have any Wi-Fi or service. But I didn't want to wait until I had internet to continue on with my project, so I looked at some of Unity's built-in assets. After I looked through all of them, there was only one that seemed to work, so I used a temporary UI asset that I just plopped into the game. It didn't look the best, but it worked and allowed me to continue on with my progress. So first up, I rigged a single leg with a couple hinges and springs, and they looked actually pretty good. After I got a leg in, it was time to add another one and hook it up to the body. With this, it feels very good and very physicsy. I was finally in service again, so time to search up some temporary assets to replace the horrendous ones that I had in the game up until this point. So I was perusing the asset store, trying to find something that could work for what I had set up so far. I was mainly looking for a set of simple shapes that I could more accurately represent the physics shapes that I had drawn up. But surprisingly, I couldn't find almost anything that fitted what I needed. There was little in the way of basic shapes. I found this one asset that said it could draw physics shapes, and I tried it out, but it didn't work immediately, and I'm very impatient, so I decided to just keep with the temporary UI assets and just keep plugging away with my game. With the legs all set up, it was time to write my first script. This script had a pretty simple function. It was to switch between two springs that were acting as the muscles in the legs. This was how I was going to try and implement movement into the game and try and keep it truly physics-based. This script was super easy to write. It took me very little time at all and less than 20 lines of code or something. After I wrote this script, it was finally time to make my first actuated joint, the knee. I set up the scripts and all the springs and then started the game. And of course, it didn't work. I was pretty sure it was just with the springs that I set up, so I kept fiddling around with it for quite a while, until I finally realized that I just didn't have the springs set up to be attached to the right rigid body. Super dumb mistake. But with this, I had a single working knee, and it looked brilliant. It wasn't much, but I could see a future in it, so I kept up the work. From the knee, I then moved on to the ankle, and then the hip. With this process in, I totally didn't mess up setting up the hip by keeping the auto configure option checked and not notice for an hour. But with these joints in, I was really starting to see the potential of the movement. It felt like with a bit more tweaking that I could get it set up to the point that you could controllably move the character. The player was flopping around quite well, but there's still a way before it was actually moving. This required me adjusting how much each limb weighed and how strong the muscle for it was. I was playing around with a couple different weights and springs on the bus ride home from a track meet. I know, how fitting. When I decided to have some of my buddies try out the game. For the most part, they really enjoyed it. They figured it out pretty quick and had a bit of success. Though they enjoyed the game, this was a really good eye-opening opportunity to see what I needed to fix and change in the game. I realized two things that became the main foundations for how I progressed with the movement. I needed to lower the center of mass and keep him front heavy. This way the runner would want to stay upright and want to lean forwards, directing the movement in the right direction. Before I started to truly hone in the movement, I needed to put the arms in. I decided that I needed to add the arms first. The arms weren't essential to the movement mechanics of just running, but if I were to add something else, and they might come in handy, and more importantly, I don't want some armless being running around, and it needed arms for aesthetic purposes. I wanted to add these first so it wouldn't throw off the fine balanced movement. With the arms in, it was time to fine-tune the movement. I tried a lot of different things, like a lot. And after hours of playing with settings, I landed on something truly wonderful. It had a perfect balance of playability and challenge. It was perfectly riding the line, knowing that it was possible to walk normally, but incredibly challenging to actually do so. What can I say? I'm basically a modern-day Picasso. Right after I finished this up, guess what? I was on another track trip. You get the idea that I'm busy with track a lot. But again, I had my friends try it and they thought the exact same things as me. So with this emotional go-ahead, it was time for me to turn to the art of the game. I wanted the art to be pretty simple, with just simple shapes and colors that were in a very minimalistic style. The first thing that I did was take a screenshot of the player that I already had. With that, I took it into Photoshop and drew a quick outline of the shapes so that way I could try and follow the original form of the player. And with that, it was ready to start drawing. First off, I did what I always do and found a color palette on LawSpec. It wasn't anything special, but I didn't need anything special. The first part that I drew was the torso. With that looking pretty darn good, I did the head, the arms, and finally ended on the legs. I was actually pretty surprised by how easy it was and how good it looked. I got the perfect minimalistic style that I was going for. The face is a prime example of this. Instead of worrying about the small little details and features, I just made an outline and left him bald. Totally wasn't just too lazy to draw the hair. For all the clothes here, I decided to leave them plain white, so that way in Unity I could recolor the clothes on the fly and change up how it looked super easy. This also allowed for a way to possibly change the color of the player in-game in the future. Right as I was finishing up with this, one of my buddies suggested that I could add a googly eye onto the player. I absolutely loved this idea and drew just a simple white circle with a black pupil in the center. This was all the art I needed, time to put it back into the game. I thought that putting the art into the game was going to be pretty simple. After all, I did make sure it all lined up with the colliders that I had, but this is where I was wrong. Very wrong. I imported the assets, and at first I was just going to replace the messy temporary assets that were in the game. Easy. Except it wasn't. The way that I had made the player in the first place was stretching and scaling the objects, so that way the sprite would more accurately represent the shape. But when I tried to replace that asset with something that didn't need to be scaled or stretched, it was all messed up. But that wasn't that bad. Easy fix, I'll just change the scaling back to normal. I went around and fixed this up for the whole player, and he was looking really good. Until you press the play button. I fixed all the colliders and all that, but since I changed the scale, that meant I changed the scale for the joints as well. So now all the joints and springs were messed up. So what was I left to do but completely redo all the springs and joints and completely restart on my immaculately fine-tuned movement. Yay. So I went back through, fixing every physics joint and spring and trying to bring it back to the former glory that I had lost. It really wasn't that bad, I'm just moaning and complaining, but in the end I got it back to a playable state. It mostly feels the same, but I could feel a slight difference between them. It was small and I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. I think it made the game more playable in my second iteration, which was probably better for the experience. With the player up and running, literally, his track was looking quite bare. I mean, it isn't even a track. He's just running on some random block in the middle of the void. Time to go back in Photoshop and draw some more art. The track I drew was really simple, but that's kind of the nature of a track. There's a few lanes on just a simple orange track. Easy peasy. The hurdle that I drew next wasn't much of a hurdle. Get it? Wink wink. In all seriousness, it was really pretty easy. It was a couple of simple shapes just stacked onto each other with simple colors, and boom, a hurdle. Next up, I needed a cool and interesting background. I was having a lot of thought about this and couldn't quite make up my mind. Originally, I was thinking of going with a stadium in the background, but I was really getting worried that it would look too messy and that I couldn't pull it off. But with nothing else I could think of, I finally drew a simple test stadium. And I actually loved it. It was pretty much perfect for what I was going for. They were detailed enough, but didn't jump out too much from the background. One more detail I drew was a couple of different clouds to put in the sky to fill it up, and that's all the art. So I put the art in the game and it truly looked phenomenal. The look was exactly what I had wanted, and the art direction for this game was definitely right on. Following that, the time had come to add in the hurdles that I just drew. These only had 2 colliders, and the only testing they required was fine-tuning the weights of the hurdle, and bam! There was no real way to jump over the hurdles. You're kind of designed to knock them over, which really interrupted the movement, so you'd have to adjust on the fly. With this, I spent a lot of time playtesting the game because it was really fun, and I was procrastinating what I had to do next. The way that I had the game so far was just a static camera. If you left a screen to the right or the left, then you just left the game. Obviously, not a good solution. The first thing that I tried was using Cinemachine. It sorta worked. I could have gotten it to work in the end, but that was a lot of work for a pretty simple camera movement, so I decided it was time to write my second script for this project. This script was on par, if not more simpler than my first script I wrote. It was super duper short, but it works, and that's all you can really ask for, right? But with this in, the game just felt great. The games felt great at every step of the way. With this, the entire gameplay side of things was just done, and it was time to turn to the horrible dragging on pain that is UI. UI really isn't that bad. It isn't hard or overly complicated, it just sucks. You're at the end of your project and you just want to get it over with and be done. But no, you have to set up menu after menu and button after button. Well, but let's get started. First up was a timer. I wanted a timer in the top of the screen, reminiscent of all the 7 segment timers that you see at a bunch of track meets. I looked up some different fonts online until I found one that just screamed track timer and downloaded it. This fit perfectly in the top of my screen, along with the pause and restart button that I put beside it. The clean look of the UI looked really nice in game, so I decided to press forward. I decided that I wasn't going to have a start screen for this game. You're just going to be plopped in the middle of the game. But there needed to be some way for the player to understand what's happening. So I made a screen laying out all the controls and function that looked pretty swifty. I was on a roll with the UI, and it was time to finish off some of the last little details. I made a pause screen with a couple of buttons and an end screen that was pretty similar to that. And now it's time for me to jump into my third and last script of this project. This script was going to control all of the UI and menu stuff. First in that list of menu stuff was getting the timer at the top of the screen actually working. This was harder than I thought it was going to be. I wanted to make sure it kept with the 7 segment look and make sure that all the blank spaces were filled with zeros. I'm sure that there's an easy way to do this, but I definitely didn't do it that way. But oh well, it works, and that's what really matters. From there, I used the script to hook up all the UI buttons, and it didn't provide much of a challenge, and after only a bit of work, it was all working. One small little detail that I did that I absolutely love is that when you cross the finish line, I turned down the time scale so it's all in slow motion, and I just love the effect that it adds. One thing I wanted to do before exporting and finishing the game was extend the level a little bit. At that point in time, it was really short with only one hurdle. I thought I'd just add quite a bit of length and a couple more hurdles. It was really easy to do with just some copy and paste action. The game was really great. I absolutely loved playing it, and it's one of the highest quality games that I think I've ever made. But a great game needs an equally great name. What to call it? Up until this point, the project had simply been called Track Game in my computer, but that clearly wouldn't work. So what better to do than turn to my old chap, Mr. GPT. He gave me a couple of suggestions, and once we narrowed it down a bit, I landed on Awkward Athletics. It was perfect. It showed exactly how I felt about this game. The name also wasn't limited to just running. Hint hint. With me knowing what to call the game, it was finally time to export it. Usually this takes a lot of trial and error, but this time it only took me 3 builds before I got it working, which is pretty darn low in my books. I filled out my itch page and got an amazing tagline from GPT. Embrace the chaos, triumph in turmoil. From there it was pretty simple and I published the game. It's free for anyone to play. Link in the description. When I started this game, it was right in the middle of track season, but when I finished it, it was right up at the end. On the bus ride to our state meet, the last meet of the season, I decided to pull out my laptop and show a couple of my friends, and they all loved it. There's no better feeling than pulling out a game that your friends all love. Then when they ask you where you got it, you get to tell them that you made it yourself. Pure dopamine. I didn't record them playing it because I'm not a creep who just records my friends, but they had a blast and we tried for a while to bring down our best times. My personal best time is 27 seconds, and the best time overall was 19 seconds, done by my girlfriend of all people. I had a great state track meet. I medaled in 3 of my events and got a PR in each of them as well. And with that done, I was done with both my track season and my track game. I had a ton of fun making this game, and I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I do. If you beat my time, please let me know in the comments or at my itch page. If you liked this video or liked me talking about running, check out the first Brackeys game jam that I entered. I'll have that link down below. I've been trying out doing a bunch of more simple projects lately, and it's been nice to be able to start and finish something within a couple weeks. Now that I'm done with track and school for the year, I should be able to put a lot more time into making games and videos. Let me know if you prefer the smaller, more frequent projects, or if you'd prefer bigger games but longer times between each video. Thanks to the 3 of you who are for some reason still watching me rant. Please like and subscribe. Or don't. I'm not your mom. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.